This is Hidden Killers Week in Review.
A look back at the most prolific stories of the week.
This is Hidden Killers Live with Tony Brueski, Stacy Cole, and Todd Michaels.
Kada Scott, she was 23 years old. That is Kada right there. She worked in elder care, the kind of job that takes more heart than most people will ever give. She was harassed. She reported it. She said she felt unsafe. And the system let her die anyway. 2 weeks after she vanished, her body was found in a shallow grave behind a boarded-up middle school in Philadelphia. The man charged with kidnapping her, Keon King. He had already been arrested months earlier for stalking and strangling another woman. Why was he free? Well, that's what we're going to unpack today. The case had surveillance video. It had witnesses. It had enough to prosecute. But the DA, in their infinite wisdom, they dropped it when the victim didn't show up to court. Now DA Larry Krasner says, we could have done better. You think? It's not a lesson learned. That's an admission that the system designed to protect the public simply chose not to. Today, former prosecutor and defense attorney Eric Faddis joins us to unpack how this could happen step by step, from the decision not to prosecute to the lack of oversight to the total absence of accountability. Because until we understand where the system broke, we can't stop it from breaking again. Eric, let's start with the decision-making itself as we get into this one. When prosecutors have a prior kidnapping and assault case with video evidence, walk us through this, how this should work and how this did work. How does that even land on someone's desk and get dropped because one witness did not appear? Let's start there.
Sure, Tony. So, kidnapping charges are extraordinarily serious. And on top of that, my understanding is that there were some stalking allegations. Yeah. When I was a prosecutor, that was such a red flag that someone who's willing to go to those lengths to sort of predatorily prowl and seek out their victims over time with repeated contacts, that is a huge signal that something is wrong, that individual is capable of something horrible. When a witness doesn't show up, that's of course problematic. And sometimes the prosecution needs those folks to prove their case. That being said, there are measures that can be taken, including subpoenas, including going to the court and saying a person didn't appear on a subpoena. So there were red flags and there were things that could have been done to try to further that prosecution. It sounds like they weren't done.
I want to understand basically the rules of the game here. If the witness, the person who is saying I am being stalked, and this person has we know what took place, what the charges are, but she didn't show up to court. Now people could go, well, she didn't show up, then you just dismiss it. Is that how that works? If the person does not show up, it just immediately gets dismissed, no matter what mountain of evidence may exist against the person that's being accused, that has the charges already against them?
Not at all. When we're talking about those kinds of cases, they sometimes they need the victim, but there are cases where you have other evidence. Like you said, there sounds like there was video evidence of what happened. Mm-hmm. You don't always need the victim's testimony. Even when the victim does not show up, there are measures that can be taken. In Colorado, if you've subpoenaed that victim and they don't show up, you ask for a continuance of the trial and you have the judge issue a warrant for the victim. It's a harsh measure to take, but it's sort of a last resort to keep the case going. That could have been done. I don't have any evidence that was done in that earlier case that you're referencing.
No, it makes no sense to me. And I wanted to understand the ground rules first of, if they don't show up, does it automatically just get dismissed? Are we getting mad for no reason here? But what you're saying is Krasner, he failed. He had the opportunity to stop this person. He had the opportunity to continue pressing those charges, not dismissing them out into the ether. And it was a decision that was made. It wasn't some sort of policy or rule of how this works. It was a choice that was made by the DA.
From all of the information I reviewed, yes, it appears to be a decision that was made and not some sort of automatic legal outcome that was mandated for that witness not appearing. Like I said, as a prosecutor, you have to subpoena your necessary witnesses. And if it comes to the trial date and you don't have them under subpoena, you can request a continuance of the trial. In fact, you can request multiple continuances to get a witness under subpoena. If you subpoenaed them and they don't show up, you can still request a continuance and a bench warrant to go out and have a fugitive team find that witness, bring them into custody, and have them present for the next trial. So no, this appears to be just a decision that the prosecutor made rather than some legally mandated outcome.
Stacy?
So my head just keeps shaking here. Like, is this part of a flawed system, or is this... It's just a failure of one person. I mean, and that's a very broad statement to make, but I feel like, and Tony, we talked about this before we went live, like this just keeps happening over and over again. It feels like the system is almost set up for the perpetrator versus the victim. And it should be for the victim. You should be advocating for people who have had things done to them to protect them and to be there for them. At what point do we say the system is flawed? We need to do something better?
Sure. It is a pattern that has repeated, across the country in many criminal cases. And when we're looking at whether a witness shows up, that's a complex issue. There's a lot going on with that witness. They might have reasons they don't want to show up. They didn't ask to be involved in this court process. That being said, in order to ensure community safety and accountability for the alleged wrongdoer, there are measures that can be taken. And so I think it appears to be a function perhaps of sort of the prosecutorial outlook and mindset and strategy in some prosecutors' offices to, I guess, kind of move on from a case. They've got a ton of other cases they've got to handle. And so this one, hey, I've got a good reason to let it go. The witness isn't showing up. I'm going to hang my hat on that reason. And then lo and behold, something horrible happens, months down the road.
How often do things like this happen? Because I would think it might be kind of frequent, especially in situations where you have a predator, a perpetrator here, and then you have a victim that's been preyed upon, kidnapped in this case. And for those playing along at home, we're talking about the case prior to Kada Scott that could have stopped this from happening. So just in case you're confusing the two, we're talking about the one that happened before that the DA let go. When you have that sort of a scenario, I can imagine if you're the victim of this perpetrator, you might be a little reluctant to go into court, to be seen again, for them to see you again, to have to see them again. I mean, it's re-traumatizing in its own way. So you probably have quite a few, I'm going to guess. I don't know. Is it common where the victim will simply just not show up because for fear of their own safety, for fear of what the system may do, or whatever their reason may be, out of fear based on what that perpetrator did? And if that does happen frequently, how often is this the outcome where it's, all right, well, they didn't do their part, so we're not going to do ours, and we got, like you just said, there's a big stack of stuff over here we got to deal with, and they showed up and you didn't?
Tony, it's much more common than people realize. When I was a prosecutor, especially at the lower level, the county court level, where we're talking, simple assault cases, oftentimes the victim would be afraid of the perpetrator,
Sure.
would not want to go into court and provide evidence against that person. What if the prosecution loses? What if the defendant wins? He is then free, and this witness who testified against him is in the crosshairs. That being said, although that happens frequently, dropping a case of this magnitude is much less common. If we're talking simple assault, a lot of prosecutors will write it off and say, hey, this is a minor case, I'm going to move on to the next one. When we're talking kidnapping, when we're talking stalking, we're talking these sort of lethality factors that arise in the context of intimate violence and just male on female violence. Usually you go to the ends of the earth to try to find that victim and bring them into court. You request as many continuances as you need. You issue as many subpoenas as you need until the court dismisses it, rather than the DA unilaterally deciding, hey, we're not going to go forward.
Eric, as a prosecutor, Did you ever have a moment personally where you knew that dropping a case was going to put somebody at risk? And if so, what do you do? I mean, how do you sleep at night? And I don't want to throw it back on you personally, but there's a human element to this. There has to be. How do you deal with that?
Oh, sure. It's something that's always going through your mind as a prosecutor, because really your duty, in a sense, is to kind of shepherd this community and to make sure that there are no predators out there who are going to hurt the folks in your city and your neighborhood and your county. And so it happens all the time. In fact, when I was a prosecutor, there was a time where the defendant failed to appear and the trial had to be, couldn't go forward. And I was walking around that courthouse and outside the courthouse looking for that person because I thought I saw him early on in the day. Sometimes you have to take it into your own hands and really go above and beyond to try to make these prosecutions go forward despite these hurdles. And I don't have any indication that the prosecutor's office made such attempts.
In something like this, I mean, if you are the victim and you don't want to appear, you're scared. It's ultimately a choice out of fear. And yes, the system has ways of compelling. You just listed a whole bunch of them, all the way to basically we're going to take you into custody and bring you into court. But I mean, that's almost like re-victimizing the victim in right. Many ways. What sort of tactics or tools exist, if any, to compel a witness to come in and to feel safe on their own free will, to protect them and let them know, look, you are safe coming in, or do we very much lack in that area? Are we much more kind of nuts and bolts of they're not here, let's get them here by force, rather than let's get them here on their own free will because we are going to protect them and make sure they're safe from this predator that's in the same room as them?
That's one thing, Tony, that sort of soured me on prosecution and caused me to go to the criminal defense side, is because, yes, issuing a bench warrant for a victim, my gosh, if they've already been traumatized, then having to be taken into custody and booked into the jail and put into jail scrubs, and then testify against the person they're afraid of, that is horrible for that person. And so, you want a good victim witness team. You want to build that rapport. You need to keep the communication going. But what legal mechanisms do we have to protect that victim on the back end? If the defendant's sentenced to prison, well, the defendant is out of the community for a period of time. But usually it's not like they have to wear a GPS monitor for the next 5 years or something. And that victim is always going to be looking over their shoulder. And so that is really a disincentive for those victims to come in and testify. And really, there are all these disincentives and not very many incentives.
You're just adding trauma on top of trauma. So how do you change the system? Can the system be changed to advocate for the victim versus the actual criminal?
It's an important question, Stacy. And, we talk about protective measures like protection orders. That really on its face is just a piece of paper that says a guy or a person can't contact another person. Those aren't always abided by, of course. We do have GPS monitors, and those can be helpful, but they are not an indefinite, they're not a permanent solution by any means. Different prosecutor teams have different victim witness advocates who can explain the process to the victim, try to make them feel comfortable. There are usually local law enforcement that are willing to do higher activity and surveillance in the victim's area as the case is going and after it's going on. But all that drops off at some point, and the victim is left with that fear that, hey, what have I done to this person, and what are they going to do to me now?
Is this another example of just how our system is so antiquated in every way, shape, and form that we think that this piece of paper is going to hold somebody back? I mean, the same way that we go, well, you signed your name on a piece of paper, that must mean everything. It doesn't, and it doesn't mean anything to these people. Is this something that just really needs to be rethought of in today's terms? I mean, yeah, there's GPS monitors. That's lovely. But then you're relying on that monitor going off when they're in the wrong place. And then you're relying on police getting to them before they commit some sort of crime. It feels like we operate like it's 1895 in so many ways. And look, these pieces of paper, they didn't work then either. but we keep doing them. We keep acting like they mean something.
Yeah, right. And on top of that, GPS monitors can be cut off. I've seen many cases where a person just cuts them off. And then now everyone's really scared. What is that person planning if they don't want to be tracked and they have an ongoing case? I'm not a huge proponent of like increasing oppressive bonds or something like that. But when we're talking about stalking, when we're talking about kidnapping, those folks are usually a danger to the community and should be the community should be protected until that individual gets a trial and is either acquitted or convicted. Here, it sounds like this person was just let out, which would be very uncommon in Colorado jurisdictions under these circumstances due to the gravity of the charges and the allegations in the earlier time case.
When you look at the charges here, obviously they're pretty bleak. It's not like a light that's like a marijuana charge or something like that. It's stalking. It's nuts. It's kidnapping. What on earth? I mean, obviously this is just pure speculation, but what on earth is going through that DA's mind when it's on video that this happened? The victim didn't show up. You've been doing this guy was a defense attorney for a long period of time before he started becoming a prosecutor. He's not like new to this. You would think he understands a little bit about how victim mentality works. I mean, he was a civil rights prosecutor, a civil rights attorney for a while. You would think that someone of that mindset would have the grace, the understanding of a victim, and wouldn't be so quick to just drop a case like this. What on earth was going through his mind at that moment to think, oh well, let's just let him go? That's the part that baffles me. Other than I don't know, complete utter distraction of something else in one's life. This just doesn't make sense to me.
It is certainly puzzling. I think some critics will say that this is a function of what are called or would have been termed progressive prosecutors. And I think that prosecution needs to change. I think there needs to be changes in prosecution. On the other hand, we can't go so far in the other direction that we are overlooking obvious risks to the community, obvious risks to actual victims here. And yeah, when you have that stalking charge, that was one thing that was drilled into me as a prosecutor, is that is a red flag. That is a person you need to watch in this community because they are hunting. According to the allegations, they are hunting other human beings in your community. And so the decision to just kind of let them go free and whatever, especially when it's on video, there are ways to prove cases without victims, without witnesses, when you have that other kind of evidence. And so I'm surprised they didn't try a creative approach, even perhaps a lesser charge. If they didn't think they could prove the most serious charges without the victim, there are lesser charges that can be pursued that could at least provide some safe haven for a period of time for that community.
Does fear of losing a trial push prosecutors to play it safe instead of playing it right in something like this? Meaning, well, this witness is already really reluctant. Maybe they have some knowledge of this and they really feel like, well, they're probably not going to participate. So why even spend my time on this? I mean, is it, I don't want to have this on my track record of, this didn't work out for me. This isn't going to be one that's going to look good on my record. So I'm just we're going to push it out here so it doesn't ding it that way. I mean, it's purely bureaucratic, but I wonder, does that exist in the system with some prosecutors?
Nearly every person has some degree of an ego. And for lawyers, that's like times 100. And even, especially for criminal lawyers, especially for prosecutors who are in the public eye, like Larry Krasner, there is certainly, I would imagine, a motivation to not want to have that L on your record, especially on a high-profile case. And so, if the case is dismissed, that's much different because purportedly that they couldn't get the victim's cooperation. That's much different than going to trial and actually suffering that loss. And so, sometimes prosecutors kind of cherry pick; they pick and choose which cases they think are strongest and most likely to lead to a win. And sometimes that's a valid approach, but yeah, certainly I've got to wonder whether those personal considerations could have contributed in some form or fashion to the decision the prosecutor made, and if so, that's probably not a valid factor on which to either dismiss or move forward with a prosecution.
Are there any checks and balances in this system where if you have a prosecutor that makes a move like this? I mean, could there have been anyone in that office that when these charges were dropped that said, wait a second, let's take a look at this again. This doesn't make sense. Or once that decision is made, that decision is made. And then there's no consequences for that decision for the person that makes it.
There's really no good legal mechanism by which such a decision could be challenged. If the prosecutors have what's called prosecutorial discretion, which really means, hey, they get to decide which cases they like and want to go forward on and which one they don't. And when they make that decision, the judge can't say, hey, I disagree with dismissing this case. I'm going to force you to move forward on it. You can see sort of the problems that could arise with that because of you're compelling a prosecutor to move forward on a case they don't like. They might not try that hard. It might not be a successful prosecution. But should there be some other kind of mechanism where the victim could petition the court, could ask for a substitute prosecutor? These are ideas that have been considered.
Is there ever a point where a prosecutor could face charges themselves for negligence in this case?
In many states, there is such robust immunity for governmental actors, including prosecutors, in the decisions they make, especially when it comes to their own discretion, because they're going to come up with reasons that sound valid no matter what. Typically you can't sue a prosecutor. Sometimes they'll try to sue police departments for not pursuing a crime or a person that they had evidence against. But even those are really difficult to win. I think there's a problem with how broad prosecutorial immunity is. And I've actually sought to try and change that in Colorado. But that's a work in progress across the country.
Do you think there would ever be progress on that? I mean, obvious, you're kind of like it's an uphill battle, I would imagine, to try and fight that one, because I would, anybody in that community certainly, benefits from that protection, and rightfully so in many cases. You don't want just a bunch of frivolous lawsuits going against prosecutors that somebody disagrees with for grounds that make no sense. But at the other side of the coin, you have these sort of situations that go on every day. What is the solution? What is the healthier middle ground, rather than just constantly swinging way over here or way over here, when reality tends to be more in the middle?
It's a tough issue to navigate. One thing that's come about recently is trying to impose some kind of accountability on prosecutors' discretion when they are grossly negligent. And that includes whether they go forward on a case that's bogus or whether they choose not to go forward on a case that is legit and then something horrible happens. They've talked about possibly having attorneys' fees and costs be imposed against prosecutors when they go forward on a bogus case. And I'm just wondering if there's some kind of corollary on the reciprocal where they choose not to go forward on a serious case and then something bad happens. Hitting the pocketbook is always can move the needle. You can get traction there, but really those ideas are in their infancy, and legislatively that there is just not much of a political appetite for that kind of thing.
It would take a lot. We're talking with Eric Faddis about the Kada Scott case. She is the young woman who was murdered and found behind an abandoned Philadelphia school after a predator that should have been behind bars but was not, for previous charges, found her and killed her, even though she also had been saying, I'm being stalked, there's problems here, this is not good, and then she's dead. We're talking about the District Attorney Larry Krasner a lot as well. Oftentimes when you have cases like this and there's enough public outrage, the first thing you hear is, well, we're going to do an internal review. Yeah, we're going to internally look at things. We're going to put ourselves to evaluate ourselves. What do you think will happen next here now that there's a big spotlight over here on this case with Krasner's office?
Well, I think that it is a review and investigation would be appropriate in just to try to identify what went wrong. What were these choice points at which a different decision could have been made, and why wasn't it made? I'm not saying we necessarily need to investigate and put prosecutors in jail or something, but what I'm saying is having a review is important, and having some independence in that review is critical, because when you have your own office, your buddy that you eat lunch with and go to happy hour, and he's the one investigating you. This sort of thing happens in internal affairs investigations of police departments too, where they work together. They go to they go to the Memorial Day barbecue together and stuff. And there is just a lack of independence in some of those reviews, which can skew the results, obviously.
Well, nobody wants their world interrupted, that's for sure. Everybody wants to keep going along, and if they make a mistake, hopefully nobody sees it. And obviously, people see this one, and it's a pretty big one that's being exposed. Should there be almost automatic safeguards that go into place when things like this happen, when it can be easily traced? Okay, well, this decision was made, this person was free, this person reoffended in such an extreme way, almost just an automatic, okay, the system, there's something wrong over here in the system. It's the waterproof doors that are immediately shutting so the ship doesn't sink, that just go into place, especially if there's prior arrest for violent offenses. I mean, should this trigger basically an automatic review, an automatic something that stops the prosecutor from, I don't know, continuing anything until we can determine, is this person making sound choices? Should there be is this something where there needs to be another department within the courthouse, or an independent department out completely independent of everything that can step in and go, okay, this was triggered, what's going on over here, so we can stop this before it's okay, well, the podcasters are catching on now after a string of horrible choices. Now the only reason anything's happening is because their feet are being held to the fire and they're being exposed.
Going back to summer school almost. You screwed up here. Let's fix this.
It would be in their best interest to not have it go this far, to not have to have their name dragged through the mud for poor decision making. I don't know. I mean, it seems like this is such a prevalent thing that goes on, and we just have no real direction on how to fix any of it. And the answer ends up just being, well, that's how the system works.
One thing that comes to mind along those lines, Tony, is in the federal government, we have inspector generals. And my understanding is that they retain some significant independence, and they're trying to look for, they're looking for corruption, they're looking for waste and fraud and that kind of thing. But what they do is they sort of act as an independent check. It's on some of these executive branch actors, as well as some legislative actions that are taken. And so, would it make sense at the state level to have somebody like that? In Colorado, we have, the name escapes me, but there's a tiny little office that purports to do that, and you never hear anything about them, and you never hear of them taking any significant action at all. But some sort of state corollary for that that was robust and credible could be effective, because the system we have right now isn't working. It's just a prosecutor who has the final say. And, once they make the decision, too bad for everybody else. And if something horrible happens, well, I didn't I made my decision at the time, and so be it. And that's not working.
Are we relying too much on humans being intelligent? At the end of the day, I mean, are we? I mean, look, I'm not saying I think it'd be a great idea to have artificial intelligence integrated into our justice system, but hey, if the humans can't really handle it, maybe AI can, maybe, or something, at least some sort of a system where you check these boxes. Here's what happens. It's not reliant on a DA that is overworked and has so many cases, and getting this one off their plate really is just going to save their sanity. And they're not able to mentally balance it well. And it's not because he necessarily wants other people to go die, but because he's a human being, and there's only so much one person can process at a time. Is it that? Do we need more people? Do we need more? I mean, if we're relying on humans to make good choices and they're consistently not making good choices for whatever reason that may be, should we have more systems in place? Kind of like the 3-strike rule, like in California or things of that nature, where it's just pretty much flat out, like, did this, like kidnapping. It's an automatic this, and there's no getting out. There's no the DA's having a weird day and makes a bad decision. Because that bad day, that bad decision, whatever the reason was where he ends up going, we should have done better, it would eliminate that. And they wouldn't have to do that. Should there just be some safeguard there that is unquestionable and doesn't rely on people being intelligent?
Well, I'm all in favor of incorporating technology and innovation and analytics into nearly every industry, including the practice of law. In fact, on the civil side, there are there's software that uses AI that essentially can tell you how strong your case is, according to a number of different factors, including to historical data, things like that, that can tell you, hey, you should go to trial on this case, you're going to win, or maybe you shouldn't. Is there a way to incorporate that principle into the criminal side? There's already in pretrial services offices throughout the country, analytics that are conductive, that are saying, hey, based on this person's background, based on their criminal history, based on the alleged facts, this is what we're worried about happening because our evidence has shown us it's more likely to happen under these circumstances. And so I think embracing that is absolutely a good thing. But I think we need to be careful about going too far and just saying, if a prosecutor says, hey, look, I can't prove this case, but the computer says I can, that's also a problem.
Well,
Sure.
and something just popped into my head as we were talking about this. So, Kada, this whole thing is in Philadelphia, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Alan Greenberg country.
Thank you. Is there just this institutional failure, or are we just like salad bar picking cases? To me, if I lived in Philly, I'd be like looking around going, what the hell's going on here?
A very fair point. And I've got some buddies in Philly, and I, certainly casting no aspersions on the city itself, but there is a history of governmental corruption. There's a history of governmental mismanagement. And, Philadelphia is sort of known for that kind of infamous. And these things keep happening over there. I think surely there needs to be some oversight, more so than we have already. When you see certain incidents recur in a specific locale, you got to start wondering, hey, what's going on with this area?
Yeah, Mayberry isn't looking so good right now. Something needs to be done,
Well, I mean, and this is an elected position here. I mean, Krasner, he built his career on suing police and defending activists, and there's a place and time for that too, when it's valid. I mean, I'm wondering, and I don't know the answer to it, how much his worldview has shaped the way that he sees, prosecutions or sees prosecutors, as reformers or as necessary enforcers. You have a lot of issues going on right now. Violent crime convictions are at record lows. Repeat offenders are slipping through the cracks. It's like at a 33% conviction rate right now. So it's gone down significantly under Krasner, not in a good way, meaning the convictions are going down, not more arrests of the violent offenders.
Right.
Putting ideology into a position like this, I mean, everybody has opinions, but at the end of the day, There are things that work and there are things that do not work. And I don't know in what planet this man, I don't know what he was thinking, but if he was thinking, well, let's give him another chance. Is there, is there too much of that going on in some of these where, well, everybody deserves more chances to keep screwing up? Because all it is, it's a cycle. I mean, it's a cyclical cycle that I think some in our society just don't want to admit is happening, that some people are just broken and they're never going to be fixed. And we need to stop pretending that they're going to be.
The prosecutor position is supposed to be objective. It's supposed to be dispassionate. But when you get human beings involved, it's anything but that. And there are folks who are drinking the Kool-Aid on one side, on the law and order side, saying, hey, we need to, put people in a box for driving without a license and bring back firing squad. And there are the extremes on that end. But there are people drinking the Kool-Aid on the other end, too, who are saying, oh, gosh, this poor guy and he had a tough background or whatever, and so let's give him another shot. Well, there's got to be some mindful middle ground on that kind of thing. And so when I was in the prosecutor's office, anytime I saw someone who was too far on one side or too far on the other side, I was like, that person might be a problem, because there needs to be a separation from the extremes ideologically, politically, and otherwise.
Because this is not a political conversation. This is not a political issue. This is a right and wrong statistically. Here's what happens. Use your common sense. The guy's on camera kidnapping somebody. What are the odds he'll do it again? Probably pretty high. If he's capable of doing it once, he's probably, very capable of doing it again. And what does it do to a city? To just the functions of government all the way down to officers where they see people like this on the street again and again, and they've made the arrest, and they've made the arrest, and they've made the arrest again. And the people just keep getting out for horrible crimes or ignored. And, at some point, if you're on the street and you're the officer, you're going to be like, why am I going to waste my time? Why am I going to put myself at risk for this maniac over here who the DA just keeps letting out?
There have been vocal and sometimes public disputes between prosecutors' offices and the law enforcement on the ground based on that very issue. Prosecutors are making decisions based on a number of factors, and unfortunately, when they're elected officials, sometimes there are considerations about, hey, I need to get reelected and serve my constituents' ideology and everything else. And then, like you said in the example you mentioned, the beat cop on the street is saying, gosh, why am I going to risk my life? I got a family. Am I really going to go hard after some super dangerous guy when the person above me is just going to nullify all my work and let them back into the community? I think that's a real problem. It develops a chasm between the prosecutors and law enforcement, which is such a significant issue because they need to work cooperatively to get these prosecutions finalized and make them successful.
If technology is not going to be one of our solutions here, and it may be. I mean, it can think faster, it can think better, it can put these things into context far faster than our brains possibly can. So I'm hoping that there's some logical way that could be incorporated. But if that, I'm sure there will always be argument for that. Is this a situation where we need more judges, more prosecutors, more everything to handle the load of cases that are coming in, so we're not treating these things just based on convenience rather than what is actually going to be right and morally correct for the safety of our communities?
I think that most jurisdictions could use better funding for more prosecutors. When I was in the prosecutor's office in Arapahoe County, one of the biggest counties in Colorado, there was a time where I didn't have, my docket partner had resigned, and I had like 400 cases that I was in charge of. As a county court DA, a baby DA who was not that far out of law school. If I had, 4 other DAs who were working on those cases as well, we could have, I imagine the work would have been more thorough and more successful and effective. But there gets to a point where these folks might be drowning and they're just saying, hey, I'm looking for any opportunity to jettison some case so that I can, get home by 8:30 p.m. tonight instead of 10:30 p.m. tonight.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like they're putting their best legal foot forward if you subject attorneys to this kind of environment. I mean, we hear that a lot in many professions where there's not any mechanism to kick in to say, okay, enough is enough, whether it's in the medical field, truck drivers. I mean, whatever it is, we have these things in place saying, oh, you can't work this amount of hours. But look at the human toll that takes place here. And it isn't until we see a catastrophic case like this that we start talking about it. Why isn't what you're saying enough?
Oh, totally, Stacy. And it's a problem on both sides, at both tables in that courtroom. Public defenders are horribly underfunded, too. And so they've got people's lives in their hands, and they're have these oppressive caseloads. But that happens on the prosecution side, too. And it becomes this, I don't want to say game, but a way where you're trying to retain some semblance of a personal life and a lifestyle and happiness. And so you're not in the office, every hour of your waking life. And at least in my experience, both sides were woefully underfunded. Better funding for more prosecutors, more public defenders is only going to strengthen the system. And it wouldn't be terribly expensive to do that when you look at some other things to which we're putting public funds towards.
Good point.
Is there any mechanism at this point? I mean, Krasner is still there, obviously. And I want to ask this, how surprised are you that he made a statement that even said, well, we could have done better, essentially? Most of the time, they just shut up and just, stick to their guns, and we're going to brush this and wait for the noise to die down. The fact that he said something out loud, I was like, okay, well, I appreciate you saying that, but it doesn't really fix anything either.
It certainly doesn't fix anything, but I do appreciate the transparency, the honesty, and the personal accountability to an extent. I think that so often when these things happen, like you said, everybody just sort of clams up, and the only thing they say are favorable things about the actions they in their office took. I think it's good that folks can make concessions, and that's the way we sort of identify vulnerabilities in the system in certain offices. But that being said, there has to be okay, now what? Hey, I'm sorry, we could have done better, but here's what we're going to do instead. Here's how we're going to try to correct this. That's the part that I think is sometimes missing from some of these after the fact analyses.
Otherwise, you're just pandering. I mean, and I don't know, personal accountability or pandering. What is that? Where it's like, well, we could have, great, but you could have done great in a lot of cases. He doesn't have a great track record of anything in this world. If the state attorney general or the governor wanted to intervene, are there any legal mechanisms that exist to go, look, Krasner, you kind of suck, and we got to fix this problem, other than very sternly worded letters?
Some states have, including Colorado where I practice, kind of a recall measure whereby it's similar to like a no confidence vote, but you have to get the political constituency to support that kind of thing. So you sort of have a recall effort for a DA saying, hey, this person, we actually don't have confidence in them. We got to remove them now. So that's one measure that can be taken. Sometimes the attorney general can step in. Sometimes if it's appropriate and they have jurisdiction, the federal prosecutors or the FBI can try to step in and take measures in their lane. But that doesn't usually happen. And I think these high-up officials are reluctant to be overly critical of, some elected DA who made a decision under their prosecutorial discretion. And so I don't know if there's a lot of motivation to really go after a person and sort of dethrone them from that position. There was a recall effort recently in Colorado for a DA, and it failed miserably.
Why do you think that is?
Yeah.
Why do you think it failed?
For this one, this was with District Attorney Amy Patton in Arapahoe County in Colorado, big county. And it seemed like the recall effort was such political weaponization. It was coming from one particular side, and I think that some people saw it as such and said, "Hey, we're not going to oust her because her politics are different. We got to see and also it was very premature in her tenure. It was very early on, and so I think people wanted to give her a shot. So I think there are a number of reasons why they fail."
Which, when those sort of things happen, it just kind of bastardizes the whole process. And then when there is a legitimate reason to do it, people are like, well, it's a political witch hunt. We're going to throw that out there because last time it was. And then everybody's like, well, it must be a political witch hunt. And then it goes absolutely nowhere because the pond is already too polluted. What about the bar? I mean, can the bar step in any of this stuff? Should they be looking into chronic under prosecution as a form of professional misconduct when you have that sort of thing going on? And it's not just the rates are this low, it must be this or that, but something to step in and have a human or a group of humans take a look at this and go, yeah, there's a problem here. This decision-making process of whoever it is, in this case it's Krasner, as well-intentioned as it may be, doesn't work with reality. And we're over here on Team Reality. He doesn't seem to be, so we're sorry, this job is not for you.
A very novel idea, Tony. I don't think I've heard that proposed, but it makes sense because the bar does regulate underperformance, and when an attorney doesn't appropriately pursue a case on the civil side, that attorney can get dinged. They can get publicly censured. They can get suspended, even potentially disbarred if they're not, going forward hard enough on a civil case. I've seen cases where the bar says, "Hey, attorney, you didn't engage in the discovery you should have done. You didn't hire these experts, which would have strengthened your case. And you sort of left this client high and dry without sort of doing your job." And those principles apply to the criminal context where it's not your client, but it's the victim with whose interests you're aligned. And if you're sort of calling it in, is that falling below the professional standard that we want to hold attorneys to, potentially?
Yeah, because if we're looking at it, it's like, are you calling in your job or are you not? I mean, it should be looked at, not just, well, they elected it and now is what we're going to be dealing with. Yeah, I mean, why? I don't, there seems like there's so many things that could happen. And at the end of the day, everybody's operating out of fear. A fear of losing their job, fear of repercussions for this or that. The victim's not showing up because of fear of the predator. And at the end of the day, who wins? The predator.
Right.
because the system, the victims, everybody is operating in fear. And the victim, at the end of the day, is the one who ends up getting to call the shots. And they know it.
So fear abounds in the criminal justice system at every turn, at every table in there. And it is a motivating factor for sure.
Yeah.
It makes me, and I'm going kind of devil's advocate here, but it kind of makes you feel a little more empathy toward vigilantes who just go, fuck it. You know what? The system isn't going to handle this. I need to. And I'm not advocating for that in any way, shape, or form. But when you see cases like this, if I've had a stalker when I worked in radio, the reason I'm living in the current city I'm living in now is because I had a horrific stalker in Fargo, North Dakota. Horrific. Nobody could do anything. The guy smashed my car up. He called the studio, the radio studio overnight when I worked. It was my very first radio job, and told me what I was wearing. Nobody could do anything. And at the time, I was just terrified. So I packed up pretty much in the middle of the night and left. Now, I might think a little bit differently. And I don't like where my mind goes. I'm going to say that out loud, that if I feel like there's no protection for somebody who is being stalked. And this case just presents that to me.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah, Stacy, and I'm so sorry you went through that because I've spoken with victims of stalking, and it's such for them an invasion and also a sense of kind of helplessness. In that I don't have help, I don't have support. There are not these tools in the system that are going to keep me safe. And so, do we consider some kind of supervision, some kind of low level? Something akin to probation for people who have not yet been convicted, but who have exhibited these ongoing signs of possibly wanting to hurt somebody, I'm open to new ideas, because we've had kind of the same system for hundreds of years pretty much, and it works great in some ways but not great in others.
We never can admit when we have a broken person. I mean, where are the success stories of those reformed stalkers that stop stalking?
Right?
I don't know of any. And I also don't know of anyone that protects predators other than predators. So it just seems that we have, it feels like a human error in our thinking in a lot of this, of we want to see the best in people no matter what. And we have a system that is supposed to reform. Obviously it does not, but we like to say that word because it makes us feel better at the end of the night.
Yeah.
And nothing gets done. And we can't ever seem to call out these dangerous people for what they are and keep them away from society because, well, they haven't killed anybody yet. But we don't, but clearly, again, where are the reformed stalker stories? Where I've never heard, have you ever heard one? Well, I used to stalk women, or I used to stalk whoever it may be. And then I saw the light and I thought, gee golly, I was in the wrong.
Yeah,
it
now
doesn't exist.
I gave women back their agency, and I decided I don't need to tail them, and watch their every move.
It's it's like child pedophiles. Like, in other words, like, well, gee golly, I don't like them anymore. I've changed my way. It's like it's in them. It's just it's for whatever reason how their brain functions and works. And there's no amount of law. There's no amount of reasoning. There's no amount of therapy. There's no amount of drugs that are going to change it. It's just who they are, and we can't seem to accept that. We just keep going, well, we're just going to put him over here, going to do this, rather than being like, sorry, game over. Game over. You had this in you. You decided this was a good idea. You've shown this to be a pattern. It's not a misunderstanding anymore. It's time for you to go. And I don't know what go means, or I know where it is in my land if we were living in Tony land, but I think that would be a very apocalyptic world. But if just in a normal society, something that puts these people away for good, to prevent them from continuing to operate with the broken brains that they have. And other than just like locking people like this up for life, I don't know what it is. I guess maybe the closest could come would be like the California, where 3 strikes you're out. Like, sorry, you're showing a pattern and we're done dealing with you.
Yeah, I mean, there are measures that have been attempted, like the 3 strikes law, and of course, there are going to be some wins from those kind of measures and some losses. There's going to be some injustices too, and is there some kind of role in the private sector? I don't I'm not saying vigilantism necessarily, but I'm saying back in the day, you had neighborhood groups who would look out for their own, and if there was someone who they thought was a serious threat and the government wasn't doing anything about it, they would take measures. Now, please, I'm not advocating for any unlawful activity.
Right,
but I'm just saying.
Eric Faddis advocates for more mobs.
No,
no, I know.
I'm not pro-mob here, but I think that we don't really know our neighbors anymore. We're not good buddies with people in the neighborhood, and I wonder if we were more close-knit on a private social level, that could help the situation.
What if we had a network online socially where we could interact and see pictures of each other and talk? I bet that'll make us all closer.
Gee. What?
That'll solve everybody's problems.
We should look into that, Tony.
I'm going to call it MySpace.
Whoa.
We're going to start there. See, I wonder where that could go.
Eventually,
that's my point.
Exactly. Yeah.
That MySpace wall had glitter, and it was just so lovely.
Yeah.
I
miss that. Oh, the old days. Eric Faddis, as always, thanks for coming on and helping us solve the world's problems. Defense attorney and former prosecutor, as always, thank you for coming on. It's going to wrap up the program for today. Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comment section on YouTube. Just search Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. You will find us there. Make that same search wherever you are getting podcasts, and you'll find us there as well. And please do hit subscribe. Until next time, for Todd, for Stacy, for Eric, I'm Tony Brueski. We'll talk again real soon.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast.